I'm going to be responsible for the development of the user interface, and so I'll have a quick plug here that if you know anybody who's a wonderful HTML designer, coder, then we're going to be recruiting soon. And we want to develop this interface. And this interface is actually very important for the project itself as well as for the utilization of the evidence that the project will produce. So one of the things that you'll have heard an awful lot about is the development of this ontology and how it's going to interact or not interact with the artificial intelligence and machine learning reasoning systems. And what we need in order to do this successfully is to get some of that user perspective in there in order to say, well, you know, some of these inferences may make sense, some of them may not make sense. I don't know if you've used some of these new handwriting or newish handwriting tools. I was trying to take some notes over there with a tablet and handwriting. Sometimes it's amazing. It gets my handwriting, which isn't great. Absolutely right. Sometimes you just don't know where it's come from in terms of what it's thinking I'm writing. And we get some of the same kind of things through from a system which is completely unsupervised. We're obviously going to have the behavior change experts' view on this, but that's a relatively small group of people. So one of the things that the user interface is going to enable us to do is to bring into the system a much wider collective of perspectives in order to critique and in order to feed through into the further development of the ontology and the system. We obviously want the system to be widely used as well as the sort of like the user interface that you see. Paul referred to the fact that the data themselves will be published as some kind of machine-readable form so that other people can then develop systems themselves using these. So this isn't just a user interface. The user could be people. The user could be other machines. And one of the things we're going to be doing as part of this section of the work is conducting evaluations. As I've mentioned, I'm interested in systematic reviews, so I'm interested as a systematic reviewer in terms of how can I use the system. So which parts of the systematic review process can be automated and how well? Am I able to replicate a systematic review using this system? Am I able to identify the same pool of studies? Am I able to identify more studies? Those are sort of fairly basic questions around how we currently synthesize and how we currently utilize knowledge. But then I think there's some more interesting questions, potentially more interesting questions, about how the use of a system like this transforms the way in which we think about evidence synthesis. What I'm thinking is that we're going to be able to draw on a much more in-depth, a much more diffuse, potentially, pool of knowledge to answer some fairly specific questions. And what I'm interested in doing is thinking about, well, okay, so we've got some studies which are not exactly in the area that I'm interested in, but thanks to the ontology, which is able to describe and identify these relationships, am I able to draw some kind of conclusions from them? Are they able to address some of my research problem? So we've got two evaluations that will I hope, get at two different sort of ways of knowing, two different epistemologies. One is the current way of thinking about evidence synthesis, and one is, well, what does this mean for evidence synthesis in the future? And there's some interesting methodological questions that maybe Mike will pick up on in his little bit here. Someone asked earlier on about users, so I wanted just to mention users. In the proposal, we've kept the users fairly broad, which is our aim is to sort of to test the degree to which different users are able to interact and use the system and want to interact and use the system. Certainly me as a researcher, I want to be able to use the system. We want to develop a user interface that will enable intervention developers, intervention commissioners, for example, to be able to consider and think through the different options for intervention, the possible different consequences of particular different intervention choices. Someone mentioned something about resources and economic and cost-effectiveness analyses. I don't think we'll get as far as cost-effectiveness analyses, partly because it's so context-dependent. But it would be really nice to be able to build in something into the system which is able us at least to consider some of the potential resources that are required for particular intervention options. Again, that's going to have to be a research question in terms of how far we get with that. I'm going to stop there because I know that Mike's going to talk about some further epistemological questions.